Hello and welcome back to this week's Bible study. As you can see, I have changed the decor a little bit, only because I moved some stuff around in my room. So I'm on a different side of my room now. So I'm really excited because I got my room all fixed up. I redecorated my room. I've been working on it for like a year and it's finally done. So just got one more thing to do, and then I will give you a reveal of my bedroom where I actually film my videos, which is my sanctuary. This little corner was on the other side, but now I'm in this little corner. So I'm really excited to be here and working for the Lord here out of my bedroom. So let's talk about what happened last week. Last week was an exciting chapter of the Bible. We're in the chapter of Joseph and talking about Joseph and all of the stuff that's going to be revealed this week. But before we get to the actual reveal, I want to talk a little bit more about some of the things from last week that we had to elaborate on. At the end of the video, I talked about how there was childhood traumas that he had to get over. And this story of Joseph shows us how deep in the heart it has to be for us to follow God's obedience into healing our childhood traumas. Joseph had his trauma in childhood, with like a lot of us do, and there's a lot of you that still have a lot of remorse over things that either you did or that happened to you as a child, and God really wants you to heal those in the name of Jesus. So I'm praying that by the end of this video you will have it placed in your heart to make it a point to try to heal those traumas that can affect the rest of your life. It affects your love for others, it affects your healing, it affects your temperament and your attitude, and it's like a cancer that grows inside your heart, and it affects the rest of your body and your heart towards other people. So with that said, the Joseph story was a rags to riches story that only God can work out. It's just such an incredible story and a great plan. Shows you that God had a plan in the end. All right, so let's talk about some of the things that the brothers did that Joseph had to deal with. He had to deal with, I'm reading from my notes, he had to deal with that the brothers hated him, that he was kidnapped, that they planned to murder him. These are all things that he heard, and you can imagine the fear of a young boy at 17 listening to all of this stuff, where before he had this incredible revelation from God that he was going to be so high and mighty, but now he was brought down to the pits of hell with his brothers. They also sold him into slavery. So you can imagine when he was down in the cistern, he was listening to these conversations of the brother talking about whether they should kill him or whether they should put him up for slavery. These are the conversations that he listened to for 3 days in that cistern while the brothers were plotting against him. This is really traumatic for somebody. So I want you to understand that. And now, not only that, but he was separated from his father. And that in itself is another thing that he had to deal with because he loved his father so much. At this point that we're at, he could take revenge of his brothers, which he could have done. And that wasn't what he did. That's what they needed in a world where, you know, we want to do an eye for an eye. That's what would have been the right choice. But he decided to go beyond that. Instead, he decided to provide for them and he decided to forgive them. So that's a mighty lesson in the way that God works in our life and the way that God was moving in Joseph's heart. Now, you have to remember that Joseph was inside Egypt, and Egypt was one of the most corrupt, evil places of its time. There was a lot of wicked things going on there, and there was a lot of practices with the slaves and so forth. But he was able to manage to shape the country. He was witnessing about God to the people. We read about that. And he was witnessing to Pharaoh and to the servants, and they were even mentioning God. They were getting blessed. And because of that, there was no racial separation there. And during this time of famine, the people could come, whether you were a Hebrew or an Egyptian, you were still able, anybody from any nation was able to come there and purchase food that made Pharaoh a very rich man. Joseph made Pharaoh a very rich man. This is how mighty God's plan was. So let's talk about this a little bit, because some people have mentioned it in other study that I've read. It's about the other healing that Joseph needed to have was the anger that he had for his dad. And that was another thing that he had to reflect on. Why did his father send him out with his brothers who the father knew hated him so much? Didn't the father, like, he probably thought these things in childhood. Didn't my father know that these kids were capable of this? I mean, remember, Simeon and Levi did mass murders. You know, he knew that they were rascals. Didn't the father at some point think that this could have been possible? The other thing is also that Jacob had a similar life of what happened to Joseph. Remember, Jacob had his problem with his sibling Esau, where they both had this competition for the birthright, and he did injustice to his brother by stealing the birthright. So he developed, Jacob, this conflict with his own brother, and it wasn't until years later that he actually came together with his brother in peace. But Joseph probably reflected on this and thought, well, wouldn't my dad have thought that this was something that these brothers were capable, because he understood what sibling rivalry was. So these were probably all these things that Joseph was going on in Joseph's head during the time that he was in jail, during the time that he was separated from his father. All of these traumatic things were going on in his life. Remember, back in verse 37:9, there was a part there where it says the sun and the moon bows down to him. That's a reference to the father, the mother, and the father. And remember that Jacob rebuked Joseph. So this is another term that he was probably struggling with while he was in jail, was remembering this, because basically what that means is your father and your mother are going to bow down to you. And he just didn't understand why his father would rebuke him for something like that. That is a pretty strong thing when you rebuke your child for something like that. It doesn't look good in front of your hateful brothers when your father, you are his favorite, and you're being rebuked for such a thing. So I also think that back in verse 40, I think it was 41, where Joseph had his son was born. I think that also helped him change his ways, and he understood when he had his two sons. I think it was Ephraim and Manasseh. We'll read that about this in this chapter. I think that has to do a lot when now you become a father and you try to understand your two siblings. And I think that was a rebirth for him at that time. Let's go there to 41:54. It was actually verse 41:51. Before the famine, and Joseph called the name of the firstborn Manasseh, for God said, he hath made me forget all my toil and all my father's house and all my father's house. And it says, and the name of the second called Ephraim, for God had caused me to be fruitful in the land of my affliction. So this was exactly what we're talking about. This was like his rebirth when he had his first son. He was able to forget and have peace and joy. Now he had his own family, and that helps a lot in healing your soul from your past family. When God moves you into a new family where you are able to choose and make decisions for your new family, and now you can reflect with your children growing up on some of the lessons that you need to learn from what happened in the past. So I think that was a great healing for him, these children, because he basically grew up in a pretty much dysfunctional family. He had different mothers, and his father had different wives, and he had brothers that were not his blood brothers, and there was a lot of competition between the ladies, Leah and Rebecca, and there's just so much stuff that was going on in his childhood, so it was really dysfunctional. The answer to all of this is that divine love, I'm reading from my notes, rescues us from feelings of rejection and redeems the human condition from the tragedy. So because he had his children and now he had this love for these children, he was rescued from these feelings of rejection, and he was able to be redeemed. And the outcome for my notes is always reconciliation of human beings to God and to one another. And that is what this chapter is all about. Let's get to chapter 45 today in the Bible. Then Joseph could not refrain himself before all them that stood by him. And he cried, cause every man to go out from me. So he's sending everybody out because he just couldn't control himself and the tears were coming out. So he just told everybody to leave, all his servants, everybody that was there. And there stood no man with him, while Joseph made himself known unto his brethren. So he called everybody out, and the only ones that were there were his brothers. And he wept aloud, and the Egyptians and the house of Pharaoh heard. So his weeping came out from this need to get all of this rejection, abandonment, this hatred, all of this had to come out at that moment. And he just bawled out in front of his brothers, and everybody who was around outside of the room were listening to this. And Joseph said unto his brethren, I am Joseph. Doth my father yet live? He's telling them, remember, he's speaking, all of a sudden he is speaking in their language. He was speaking Egyptian with a translator before. Not anymore. He is actually speaking to these people. Can you imagine? Their mouths would have been like dropped or something when they see this guy crying, this prince, this royalty there who called. They must have been feared and scared and wonder what's going on. And then all of a sudden he comes out and he talks to them and he asks for his father and he tells them that he's Joseph. Can you imagine this shock and this awe? And his brethren could not understand him, for they were troubled at his presence. That's exactly what I'm talking about. They were just like, they couldn't even reply. They were just like, they must have just dropped their mouth, and they were just like in shock. They couldn't even believe what's happening there. This is his brother. This is their brother, the brother that they hated, and that they still felt sorrow that they had done things to him, or that they were afraid that he had died. Verse number 4, Joseph said unto his brethren, come near to me, I pray you. And they came near. So now he called them over, because now he's understanding that they're fearful, they're afraid. Can you imagine? Now they know that this guy is the brother that they tried to kill, or what they did to him. They're afraid of this guy now. They're understanding what's happening here. But he's not. He's being nice to them. And he said, I am Joseph your brother, whom ye sold into Egypt. Now therefore be not grieved, nor angry with yourselves, that ye sold me hither. For God did send me before you to preserve life. This is God's plan. There was no ill will here. Can you imagine to get to this point where he can have healing in his heart, that he can give the credit to God, that God had this mighty plan for his family. Number 6, for these 2 years hath the famine been in the land, and yet there are 5 years in which there shall neither be earing nor harvest. So he's telling them the God's plan, that this is why God put them there, because there's going to be no food, and they're basically going to starve to death. Verse number 7, and God sent me before you to preserve you a posterity in the earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. Number 8, so this is revealing the plan now. So now it was not you that sent me hither, but God, and he hath made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler throughout all the land of Egypt. Now he's telling him everything that's happened to him. Number 9, haste ye and go up to my father, and say unto him, thus saith thy son Joseph, God had made me Lord of all Egypt. Come down unto me, tarry not. Verse number 10, and thou shalt dwell in the land of Goshen, and thou shalt be near unto me, thou and thy children, and thy children's children, and thy flocks, and thy herds, and all that thou hast. So he's sending him to Goshen. Goshen is a fertile land. It's one of the best places to be because it's up by the water. There's like water up there, so it's further more to the coast. And this is a very fertile land where they harvest and grow, and their animals are out there. So this is probably the best portion of the land that Egypt has. And there will I nourish thee. This is verse 11. For yet there are 5 years of famine, lest thou and thy household and all that thou hast come to poverty. Verse number 12. And behold, your eyes see, and the eyes of my brothers Benjamin, that it is my mouth that speaketh unto you. Verse number 13. And ye shall tell my father of all my glory in Egypt, and of all that ye have seen, and ye shall haste and bring down my father hither. So now he's telling him that he wants his father, he wants him to go and get his father. Number 14. And he fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck and wept, and Benjamin wept upon his neck. So these two brothers really loved each other, and they just cried together because they loved each other so much. Number 15. Can you imagine Benjamin found his big brother again? He must be ecstatic over this. Number 15. Moreover, he kissed all his brethren. So these are now, he's kissing his brothers, the ones who did this to him. This is called forgiveness. And wept upon them. And after that, his brethren talked with him. So after that, they all cried and had this moment. They started talking to each other like they should, like real brothers. Number 16. And the fame thereof was heard in Pharaoh's house, saying, Joseph's brethren are come, and it pleased Pharaoh well, and his servants. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, Say unto thy brethren, this do ye, lade your beasts, and go get you unto the land of Canaan. And take your father and your households, and come unto me, and I will give you the good of the land of Egypt, and ye shall eat the fat of the land. So now this is Pharaoh coming and being a part of this situation here, and inviting all of them to come and live here in Egypt with them. Now thou art commanded, this is verse 19, this do ye, take you wagons out of the land of Egypt for your little ones and for your wives, and bring your father and come. Number 20. So he's inviting them to go, and he's going to provide the chariots and the wagons so that they can go and get the father and their stuff and their families, because some of them are married and have children, and they can come and bring everybody to come. So Pharaoh's being pretty generous at this point with everybody. But remember, he's one of the richest men in this area right now. Joseph has done a lot for him. Also, regard not your stuff, for the good of all the land of Egypt is yours. So that's pretty much telling them, you don't even have to bring your stuff. You're just going to have everything you want. It's going to be here for you. That's a very generous offer. Number 21. And the children of Israel did so. And Joseph gave them wagons according to the commandment of Pharaoh, and gave them provision for their way. So they also were provided with food and things so that they can eat on their way back for the journey. Verse 22. To all of them he gave each man changes of raiment. So he gave everybody change of clothes. But to Benjamin he gave 300 pieces of silver and 5 changes of raiment. Wow. That is that's for his brother. He really took care of his brother there. He just loved his brother so much. He gave him 5 changes of clothing. That is pretty wealthy when you have 5 changes of clothing. And 300 pieces of silver. That is pretty rich. 23. So you can imagine what these brothers seeing all of this. They're like, wow, this guy is like super, super rich. 23. And to his father he sent after this manner: 10 asses laden with the good things of Egypt, and 10 she-asses laden with corn and bread and meat for his father by the way. 24. So he sent his brethren away, and they departed, and he said unto them, See that ye fall not out by the way. Verse 25. And they went up out of Egypt, and came into the land of Canaan unto Jacob their father. Verse 26. And told him, saying, Joseph is yet alive, and he is governor over all the land of Egypt. And Jacob's heart fainted, for he believed them not. So he was just in awe. He couldn't believe what they were saying. And they told him all the words of Joseph, which he has said unto them. And when he saw the wagons which Joseph has sent to carry him, the spirit of Jacob their father revived. So the father didn't believe them until he actually went outside and saw the wagons and all the things that were out there. Now he can believe them. 28. And Israel said, now remember, he's called Jacob, but Israel is his name that God gave him. And that's what they're using here, the word Israel. And Israel said, It is enough, Joseph, My son is yet alive. I will go and see him before I die. So remember that God outwits deceit, covers sins, provides ways to heal people. And this is what this whole thing is about. So now we go into chapter 46. Super exciting, because now this is where it's going to get really good now. Well, it's always been good, but this is getting better. Okay, 46. And Israel, still with the name of Israel, took his journey with all that he had and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices unto the God of his father Isaac. So he was so grateful for what was happening when he came to Beersheba. Remember, Beersheba, there was a place that this has significance in his life from past from the past stories that we've read about. So he stopped there to offer sacrifices, which has happened in his family in the past. And God spoke unto Israel in the visions of the night and said, Jacob, Jacob. And he said, here am I. Remember, here am I. I am is God. Here am I. I'm ready to accept you to whatever it is that you're willing to give me. Here am I. And he said, I am God, the God of thy father. Fear not to go down into Egypt, for I will there make of thee a great nation. Wow. What a great thing to hear from God. Number 4, I will go down with thee into Egypt, and I will also surely bring thee up again, and Joseph shall put his hand upon thine eyes. So when they're saying here, he would put his hand upon thine eyes, they're meaning that he would die, eventually die with his son nearby. This is the promise that God is giving him. So God reassured, I'm reading from my notes, God reassured Jacob he would be with him and take care of him. Number 5, and Jacob rose up from Beersheba, and the sons of Israel carried Jacob their father and their little ones and their wives in the wagons which Pharaoh had sent to carry him. Verse number 6, and they took their cattle and their goods which they had gotten in the land of Canaan, and came into Egypt, Jacob and all his seed with him. Verse number 7, his sons and his sons' sons with him, his daughters and his sons' daughters, and all his seed brought he with him into Egypt. So now he's like bringing the whole family, this is like this massive caravan that's coming into Egypt. And these are the names of the children of Israel which came into Egypt, Jacob and his sons Reuben, Jacob's firstborn. And the sons of Reuben, Hanok and Phalu and Hezron and Carmi, and the sons of Simeon, Shemuel and Jamin, and the Ohad and Shakin and Zohar and Shaul, the son of the Canaanite women. Now I'm going to stop here for a second. In verse number 10, it says, Shaul, the son of a Canaanitish woman. I did some research, and some people speculate that this was Simeon's child because he married Dinah after her rape from the Canaan. I remember when Dinah was raped, well, Simeon married her. Supposedly this is what happened. He married her because he pledged to care for her. She got pregnant from that rape, supposedly. This is what happened. So he pledged to care for her out of marriage formalities, not incestual. So that's why it is referred to here, the son of a Canaanitish woman. Remember, she was raped by a Canaanite. So that's why it's a Canaanitish woman, because the child is part Canaanite here. So that was what happened between Simeon, what he did for his sister. She would have had a really bad life with this child, that she was a single woman. She had been raped, so he stood up to that. And the sons of Levi, Gershon, Kohath, and Merari. And the sons of Judah, and Onan. Now remember, the sons of Judah, we talked about in that verse where we stepped away from the story of Joseph to talk about Tamar and Judah. That was important there. They broke it up there to let us know who Judah was, because Judah is going to be the direct lineage. Him and Tamar are going to be the direct lineage to Jesus Christ. And we learned about and Onan in the story there. So that's why they broke that up to explain that to us. So now we know who these people, and Onan, were. And Shelah and Pharaz and Zerah. But and Onan died in the land of Canaan. And that was part of the story. So that's why now when we're talking about it, we know about and Onan. who had died in the land of Canaan. And the sons of Pharez were Hezron and Hamul. And the sons of Issachar, Tola and Puphah and Job and Shimron. And the sons of Zebulun, Sered and Elon and Shahiel. These be the sons of Leah, which she bare unto Jacob in Paddan-aram with his daughter Dinah. All the souls of his sons and his daughters were 30 And the sons of Gad, Ziphion and Haggai, Shuni and Ezebon, Eri and Erodi and Areli. And the sons of Ashmir, Jimnah and Yeshua and Isua and Beriah and Sarah their sister, and the sons of Beriah, Heber and Malachiel. These are the sons of Zilpah, whom Laban gave to Leah his daughter, and these she bare unto Jacob, even 16 souls. The sons of Rachel, Jacob's wife, Joseph and Benjamin. And unto Joseph in the land of Egypt were born Manasseh and Ephraim, with Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, priest of On, bare unto him. And the sons of Benjamin were Bela and Becher and Ashbel and Gera, Neamin, Ahia and Ros, Piam and Ard. These are the sons of Rachel, which were born to Jacob. All the souls were 14. And the sons of Dan, Hushim. And the son of Naphtali, Jaziel, and Guni, and Jezer, and Shillem. These are the sons of Bilhah, which Laban gave unto Rachel his daughter. And she bare these unto Jacob. All the souls were 7. All the souls that came with Jacob into Egypt, which came out of his loins. Besides Jacob's sons' wives, all the souls were 66. And the sons of Joseph, which were born him in Egypt, were 2 souls. All the souls of the house of Jacob, which came into Egypt, were 70. Verse 28, And he sent Judah before him unto Joseph, to direct his face unto Goshen. And they came into the land of Goshen. And Joseph made ready his chariot, and went up to meet Israel his father, to Goshen, and presented himself unto him. And he fell on his neck, and wept on his neck a good while. So this Goshen is where they're going to reside. So they brought the chariots and everything. Were moving. They didn't come first to where Joseph was. They came to the land where they were going to preside in. And Joseph decided to come out there to meet his father when they arrived. Remember, this is the dreams that fulfilled the confirmation of God. This was planned. God had a plan, and this was the plan. And Israel said unto Joseph, Now let me die, since I have seen thy face, because thou art yet alive. After 22 years, remember his son was 17, so 22 years have passed that he hasn't seen his son. So this was a big moment for him. Sit over here. And Joseph said unto his brethren and unto his father's house, I will go up and shew Pharaoh, and say unto him, My brethren and my father's house, which were in the land of Canaan, are come unto me. Verse 32, And the men are shepherds, for their trade hath been to feed cattle, and they have brought their flocks and their herds, and all that they have. And it shall come to pass, when Pharaoh shall call you and shall say, What is your occupation? This was the invitation that they got from Pharaoh to live in this fertile land. He's going to tell them how they're supposed to reply to Pharaoh when Pharaoh comes. 34, That ye shall say, Thy servant's trade hath been about cattle from our youth, even until now, both we and also our fathers, that ye may dwell in the land of Goshen, for every shepherd is an abomination unto the Egyptians. He wants him to tell him that they are shepherds by occupation, because they were going to be kept apart from the Egyptians. He didn't want Pharaoh to invite them to stay in Egypt, because remember, there are still practices going on there that are against God. So even though he had a big influence in their life, remember, it wasn't all roses, or it wasn't all, they weren't completely, totally converted over to Joseph's God. So he didn't want his family being influenced by those other gods and idols that were over in Egypt. And later on, when we get into Exodus, which is later, and that's the next chapter, once we're done with this one, we only have like 2 or 3 more chapters to go. So next week, we'll finish the chapter of Genesis, and then we're going to move into Exodus. So when we get to Exodus, we're going to see how things changed a lot for the Israelites, because this Pharaoh was a good Pharaoh. because Joseph had influence on him. But somehow things later on changed where a Pharaoh took over who was super, super wicked. So let's continue on. All right, so verse 47, then Joseph came and told Pharaoh and said, my father and my brethren and their flocks and their herds and all that they have are come out of the land of Canaan, and behold, they are in the land of Goshen. So he's came back to Pharaoh and told him they're in the land of Goshen. Number 2, and he took some of his brethren, even 5 men, and presented them unto Pharaoh. So he brought 5 of the men from his party, from his family, and he presented them to Pharaoh. The number 5, I'm not sure what it was, but I read in something that 5 had a significance at the time in Egypt. There was something good and welcoming. So the number 5 was the reason that they highlight this 5 men here. Verse number 2, and Pharaoh said unto his brethren, what is your occupation? And they said unto Pharaoh, thy servants are shepherds, both we and also our father. Distinguishing their occupation. So this is what Joseph had told them to say. They said, number 4, they said moreover unto Pharaoh, for to sojourn in the land are we come, for thy servants have no pasture for their flocks, for the famine is sore in the land of Canaan. Now therefore we pray thee, let thy servants dwell in the land. So they're asking Pharaoh if it's okay that they can stay there, because they were invited, but they just want to reaffirm with Pharaoh that it was okay that they have all their flocks and all their cattle and all of this being grazing in the land of Goshen, which is the proper thing to do. They didn't want Pharaoh to have any apprehension or fear them. The other reason I want to explain here from my notes, it says the other reason that Joseph wanted them to not be in Egypt and to be in Goshen was because, remember, these people would sacrifice. They would sacrifice to God. So if you were sacrificing to God inside Egypt, it was not possible, because that would have formed like an outburst from the people. That would result in stoning you. So this is one of the reasons that Joseph wanted his brothers to be out in the land of Goshen, because when they were out in the land of Goshen, we'll talk about that in a second, they're going to have their own, it's like their own nation. So they could sacrifice to their God over there. They weren't basically inside of Egypt. So God's promising this land to them. They're going to start to develop as a nation there. All right, verse number 5, and Pharaoh spake unto Joseph, saying, thy father and thy brethren are come unto thee. He trusted Joseph, and that's why he's replying here. Number 6, the land of Egypt is before thee. In the best of the land make thy father and brethren to dwell in the land of Goshen. Let them dwell, and if thou knowest any man of activity among them, then make them rulers over my cattle. And Joseph brought in Jacob his father and set him before Pharaoh, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh. I'm a little bit concerned here. This is my only question with this, and I don't know, maybe you guys know why he is called Jacob here and not Israel. Maybe because he blessed him, but God didn't send him to be blessed, or because he was blessing somebody who is not a full believer of God. So that could be something important there. I'm just curious to know what you guys think. If you think that I'm right, I'm thinking because he's not really acting under God. He's acting from himself, kind of to please Pharaoh. It's coming more from himself than from God. That's why he's been referred here as Jacob blessed Pharaoh. Verse number 8, and Pharaoh said unto Jacob, how old art thou? Number 9, and Jacob said unto Pharaoh, the days of the years of my pilgrimage are 130 years. Few and evil have the days of the years of my life been, and have not attained unto the days of the years of the life of my fathers in the days of pilgrimage. So his life hasn't been exactly perfect or happy, but it's just been melancholy, where he's been not always in best of spirits, is what he's trying to tell Pharaoh here. Number 10, and Jacob blessed Pharaoh and went out from before Pharaoh. So here he is again blessing Pharaoh as Jacob, not as Israel. So I believe it's more blessing from himself to please Pharaoh as a custom, more than it is a blessing that comes from God giving him permission to bless another person. That's what I believe. Verse number 11, and Joseph placed his father and his brethren and gave them a possession in the land of Egypt, in the best of the land, in the land of Ramesses as Pharaoh had commanded. In my notes here, it says that the land of Ramesses it's in Goshen, but it's like a certain area of Goshen is Ramesses. So they're in Goshen is a big area, but Ramesses is a particular area where they're going to be residing in within Goshen, as Pharaoh had commanded. Verse number 12, and Joseph nourished his father and his brethren and all his father's household with bread according to their families. So this is a reference to an intimate, it's like a metaphor, an intimate metaphor for all the family, everybody in the family, the husbands, the wives, the children, everybody's gathered together. It's a metaphor for the entire family. It's a loving metaphor. Read for a second here. Psalm 105:22 says, he made him lord of his house and a ruler of all his substance, to bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom. This is in reference to what we just read in the story where it says, to bind his princes at his pleasure and teach his senators wisdom. So Pharaoh was preached to by Joseph. So that's why there was all of these wonderful things all of these blessings that were coming from the Lord to Pharaoh. Remember, Jacob blessed, but when God blessed, you could really see the result. Verse 13 now, and there was no bread in all the land, for the famine was very sore, so that the land of Egypt and all the land of Canaan fainted by reason of the famine. So this land was unproductive. If we go back to Genesis 3:17, it says, and unto Adam he said, because thou hast hearkened unto the voice of thy wife, and hast eaten of the tree which I commanded, thou shalt not eat of it. Cursed is the ground for thy sake. In sorrow shalt thou eat of it all of thy days. Verse 18, though thorns also and thistles shall it bring forth to thee, and thou shalt eat the herb of the field. And verse number 19, in the sweat of thy face shalt thou eat bread, till thou return unto the ground, for out of it was thou taken, for dust thou art, and unto dust shalt thou return. That is a verse that we can refer to here. This was God's telling that, things were not going to be wonderful all the time. There was going to be problems, and we were going to have to deal with a lot of these problems when sin came into the world. And you can see that that's going back to verses Genesis 3:17-19. Joseph gathered up all the money that was found in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan for the corn which they bought, and Joseph brought the money into Pharaoh's house. And when money failed in the land of Egypt and in the land of Canaan, all the Egyptians came unto Joseph and said, give us bread, for why should we die in thy presence? For the money faileth. Basically, the land was going through so many things that money had no value at this point, because you really couldn't buy anything. There was nowhere to go and buy anything anywhere. Verse number 16, and Joseph said, give your cattle, and I will give you for your cattle if money fail. Cattle was in jeopardy anyway. So I'm reading from my notes, and they could not feed them, so the cattle would die. They must give their possessions for food. So that's what's happening. Pharaoh's getting very rich off all of this. Verse number 17, and they brought their cattle unto Joseph, and Joseph gave them bread in exchange for horses and for the flocks and for the cattle of the herds and for the asses. And he fed them with bread for all their cattle for that year. When that year was ended, they came unto him the second year and said unto him, we will not hide it from my lord, how that our money is spent. My lord also hath our herds of cattle. There is not aught left in the sight of my lord, but our bodies and our lands. That was verse number 18. So they had to give for food. They had to give money first. They ran out of that. Then they had to give their livestock. When they run out of that, they're going to have to give their land. And then eventually they're going to have to give themselves as slaves to work for Pharaoh. And as you can see, when we get into Exodus, that was going to be one of the things that happens in the future, where they actually became slaves to Pharaoh in the future. 19, wherefore shall we die before thine eyes, both we and our land? Buy us and our land for bread, and we and our land will be servants unto Pharaoh. And give us seed, that when we may live and not die, that the land be not desolate. And Joseph bought all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh, for the Egyptians sold every man his field because of the famine prevailed over them, so the land became Pharaoh. So everything that the people owned, they ended up giving it to Pharaoh because they needed to be fed. They didn't have any food. And as for the people, he removed them to the cities from one end of the borders of Egypt even to the other end thereof. So in my interpretation, it was easier to distribute the food amongst the people if they were closer to where the food was. So there was no point, if the land belonged to you, it was not your land anymore. So now that you were dispossessed from your home, you can come into Egypt and live there and be closer to the food. Number 22, only the land of the priest bought he not, for the priest had a portion assigned them of Pharaoh, and did eat their portion which Pharaoh gave them. Wherefore they sold not their land. So the priests were the only ones that were allowed to keep their land, and Pharaoh continued to feed them, and he didn't need them to turn anything over in exchange for food. Basically, the people own nothing, and this is why they ended up becoming slaves in the future. We're talking about the people, not the priests. The priests were not unaffected, but the people, they ended up selling everything. They pretty much gave their life. They sold themselves to Pharaoh. 23, then Joseph said unto the people, behold, I have bought you this day and your land for Pharaoh. Lo, here is seed for you, and ye shall sow the land. And it shall come to pass in the increase that ye shall give the fifth part unto Pharaoh, and 4 parts shall be your own for seed of the field, and for your food, and for them of your households, and for food for your little ones. So Pharaoh is making a business deal with them here. He's going to provide for them, but they're going to have to give him a portion of everything. So it's about 20% of their profits is what Pharaoh is asking them to provide back to him. Verse 25, and they said, thou hast saved our lives. Let us find grace in the sight of my Lord, and we will be Pharaoh's servant. They have gratitude towards Pharaoh at this point for all that he's done for them and what he's continuing to do for them. In this land where people are becoming slaves, they are prospering. Verse 26, and Joseph made it a law over the land of Egypt unto the day that Pharaoh should have the 5th part, except the land of the priests only, which became not Pharaoh. 27, and Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen. Notice here that he is being called Israel in verse number 27. And they had possessions therein, and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Let's picture this. Pharaoh trusted Joseph. This is Joseph's family. He knows he's being blessed through Joseph, and he knows that God is continuing to bless Joseph's family. So he puts him in Goshen with the cattle and the herds. He's giving them seed. They're going to be growing fields. Now he knows that they're going to be blessed. So that's what happened. Now things started to come back up. The land became fertile. He was able to get 20% from them. He was smart in this, Pharaoh, because he knew that God was blessing Joseph and Joseph's family. Verse 28, and Jacob lived in the land of Egypt 17 years. So the whole age of Jacob was 147 years. Verse 29, and the time drew nigh that Israel must die, and he called his son Joseph, and said unto him, if now I have found grace in thy sight, put, I pray thee, thy hand under my thigh, and deal kindly and truly with me. Bury me not, I pray thee, in Egypt. He didn't want to be buried in Egypt, but I want to talk about this hand under the thigh thing, which is kind of like making him swear to him. It's a connection to strength. They say that it's there because you're close to the seeds of the genital. So that is like kind of like when you cross your heart, that kind of thing. That was what they used in those days, to put your hand under the thigh. Was like, it's like a way to swear a big promise, like you were held to that oath. And continuing on from that, I'm reading from my notes. Few things were written, so one's word carried as much authority as a written contract of today. God's people are to speak the truth as well as live the truth. So when that was a big thing back then, when you made an oath, but that was also the way of completing the oath. Verse number 30, but I will lie with my fathers, and thou shalt carry me out of Egypt, and bury me in their burying place. And he said, I will do as thou hast said. So he wants to be buried back with the family. 31, and he said, swear unto me And he sware unto him, and Israel bowed himself upon the bed's head. So now when he's saying he bowed himself upon the bed's head, he knew God's promised dream had been fulfilled. This is where he knew. And he bowed down to his son, like the prophecy was given to Joseph back when he was 17, and he told it to his father, and his father rebuked him. He bowed to his son because he knew that God's promise had been fulfilled. And he trusted his son, that his son was going to do the right thing. So back in the day, if you didn't have a tragic death and you made it to your old age, that was considered a blessing. And now we have gotten to the point where we are going to be growing in faith to get to the point where we are ready to receive God. And that is considered a blessing back in the day, to be able to get to your old age and then come to the point where you are ready to receive God. And at this point, you see that Israel, who is Jacob, is ready to receive God. He is at an old age and he is just ready to receive him. The promises have been fulfilled, and he is a gracious and grateful man for having his family back with him. So we're going to leave it at that. This was a pretty long chapter. We started at 45. We did 46 and 47. Next week, we're going to do 48. We're going to try to finish this chapter 49 and 50. We're going to do 3 chapters, which is going to be the end of Genesis, and then we're going to go into Exodus, and Exodus is going to be the story of Moses and the Israelites and all the things that they had to put up with the evil Pharaoh that came in later on in the story. Please stay tuned next week for that Bible study. That's going to be exciting. I hate for you guys to miss it. If you've been following me along all this time, we're going to be at the end of Genesis, and then Exodus is so wonderful. I hope that you can understand that a lot of the things here in the story, they're significant to us, to our lives, to the healing that we have to have. We've seen it multiple times in Genesis now. We had it with Cain and Abel, who were siblings. There was sibling rivalry. And we just continue to see the same thing happening over and over again. So I pray for all of you that have that sibling rivalry in your heart still today, fighting with your brothers or your sisters. You don't even know why. You have this envy and hatred. I cast it all out in the name of Jesus, Father God. And I ask you, please, to try to come together with your family and try to talk. Some of you don't want to do that. You still have hatred and bitterness every time you talk about your family. I know, because people talk to me about their family, and I can't believe the emotions that they still have. You shouldn't have those emotions. I talked about it last time in my video. You should be at a place where you can tell your story. I want you to go back this week and look at your life like Joseph did and see it as God's plan. What is it about your childhood, as bad as it was, or that you think that it is? Write it down. Get a piece of paper, get a notebook, and just write everything. And then come back to that and highlight those parts that really were the plan of God. What is it about those things? Did it change your character? Did it change who you are? Did it change your family? Did it change you to make you a better person? Go back and let's look at those traumas and see if they were really the plan of God to make you better. Or was there a plan of God there originally for you, but you deterred from God's obedience? You changed your ways. You fell away from God, and then bad things started to happen to you because of that. And that's something that you're going to have to realize, because you want to make peace by the time that you are old. That's going to be a blessing to get to old age. You want to be able to receive God. You want to be able to receive Jesus' heart with true cleansing and a pureness in your heart and no hatred for anybody. So, and that's a hard thing to do, because I struggle too when I have things with people, you know, that I have to repent of and constantly be repented of. So I ask you in the name of Jesus today that you come to Christ and ask him into your heart. Ask him for forgiveness, to forgive you for hating those, to show you how that you can forgive. You can ask him to help you. Ask him to help you to cleanse your heart from any unforgiveness. And he will show you the way. He will bring you to the scriptures that will give you peace and joy and happiness in your life. And I pray that for you in the name of Jesus Christ. I thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned this week for my weekly series. And if you need any prayer requests, please leave it down below. I love you, and I'll see you next week. Bye-bye.